So, welcome everyone. Welcome to another Wise Women in Conversation. And today I've got Lucy with me, who is kind of an old friend, but we don't see each other very often. And she is a Wales-based trauma-informed therapist. And she's got over 2 decades of diverse experience with her offerings, and her practice is profoundly influenced by her training with Dr. Gabor Mate's compassionate inquiry, which is a powerful psychotherapeutic approach that she weaves into her healing work. Her extensive training includes a year-long immersion with Indigenous wisdom traditions in Mexico and a graduation as a Minister of Walking Prayer from the Centre for Sacred Studies. Lucy integrates her compassionate inquiry with various healing modalities, which include creative kinesiology and working with plant medicines. She creates transformative, trauma sensitive spaces that honour the individual journey and the body's wisdom, offering often aligning to the sun, the moon, the stars, and using ceremonial grade cacao. As a therapist and ceremonial facilitator, Lucy guides towards authenticity through therapy, sacred dance, divination, and earth centered healing practices. So, after that amazing introduction, you can see why I love this woman. Thank you, Lucy. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Rachel. It's really good to be here. Really good to see you. Yeah.
And you. So, I suggested that Lucy might want to pull a tarot card because she entwines her tarot into lots of different modalities. So go for it, Lucy. What have you got?
Yeah. So I pulled the Ace of Pentacles. I've got this beautiful deck, which is the Spacious Tarot. And I really love this deck because it is very, very simple and easy to read. A lot of the tarot decks have quite a lot of can be really busy. So this is the Ace of Pentacles. You can see it's a beautiful seed, possibility, new beginnings, but something real, practical. And yeah, we were talking a little bit before we started just about the trust in the process. When I pulled this card, I thought, the trust in our ideas and the things that we're wanting to begin, really. It really gives me faith.
Yeah, I
And
get a real sense of like that hope, like faith, like you say, and hope, and just that planting, trusting the seeds we're planting right now are coming to fruition, and they're going to be beautiful. And I picked one of my Mother Mary cards, and I got Our Lady of Divine Direction, which again is all about trust. So I love that, and it is, often we just don't see the bigger picture of what's going on in the world, and I just love that she just always brings me back to it's all okay. It's all going to be okay. We're in the arms of the mother. So there we go.
yeah.
So I was inspired to reach out to Lucy after listening to her beautiful podcast that she does with her husband Gwilym. And I urge you all to check it out, Myth Mountain. Um, and they had they tackle quite a few taboo subjects on there, but there was one that really sparked my interest, which was about teachers and the gurus and the teachers that kind of fall off the pedestal from behaviors and all those things. And I do think it's part of being human, isn't it? There's this, and when you're in a position of power like that, you can fall quite far because of that position that us humble beings put them in. That's what ultimately happens, isn't it? We're kind of giving, in some level, giving our power away. And as we are both kind of in that role in the work we do as teachers, I just thought it'd be an interesting topic to talk about. And we kind of, well, Lucy came up with a few little questions or kind of inspirations that we could focus on a bit today in our conversation. And there's a couple of them that really stood out for me. Shall I just pick one, Lucy?
Sure, yeah, go for it.
So one of the ones that, because I was saying to Lucy the other day about, a lot of the spiritual spaces, let's say, are very female dominated or have been very female dominated. Even though out in the world, there are not that many powerful female teachers. So you were suggesting like a little conversation about you know, the difference in those spaces of women only, maybe men only, and when women and men come together. Because I know you hold beautiful sacred dances which are mixed, and I hold a lot of women's circles. And I have done mixed sessions of like drum making and meditation groups and things like that. But it's an interesting space and an interesting place to kind of look at, you know, what the difference, and why, you know, why these different spaces are important.
Mm.
Do you want to start, Lucy?
Yeah, sure. Well, interestingly, like I'm part of a women's circle. And so and that isn't a space where there's a leader, that it's, you know, but it is a close group, and then it and we're all women. And for me, that's has been really important. It's been a really important part of my healing, because so much of my healing comes from how I've been treated by men, particularly. And so I don't believe really I would have been able to do the kinds of release or healing or being able to share in a particular way if there had been, you know, male bodies present in the space. So I suppose what I'm talking to really is the intention in the space, and the context provides the container, you know, not like that one is better than the other, but like for me, I wouldn't have known that would happen at the beginning of that journey. And looking back, I absolutely know it only happened because I was in a container with only women, because of what I needed to heal.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether that means anything. It means something to me,
Sure. Yeah.
but it's just interesting to notice. But then when I hold my dances and the spaces I hold, they're always mixed gender spaces, because that's what feels like would serve my community best, for me anyway. And I've thought about only inviting, you know, particular demographics, and, you know, having a space for only women. The one time I really tuned into that was when I did a sacred rage dance, and that for me evoked some, you know, personal experiences of my own rage, and how, and, you know, the inquiry was whether or not I would be able to express that in front of men. And what came up for me really was that I wanted to invite all people into that possibility in that space, and not be inclusive or exclusive. And that was my own journey with that. And it, you know, there were some men in that space. There were multiple genders in that space, and it actually felt really really good to open it up in that way. So, you know, I don't have a personal experience of facilitating for only women, but I do, feels like when I'm in a women only space, you know, as someone who's experienced trauma in relation to another gender, so, you know, it's an interesting thing to explore. But, you know, I suppose I could put the question back to you, because I know that you do facilitate women only spaces, and I'm curious about yeah, if you could speak to that a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the same, really. I mean, I think you know, I facilitate women's spaces. I'm also part of a women's group where there is no facilitator. You know, we are a circle, and it's very much a deep sharing, and we've been meeting for years. And it's a different space again, but obviously in the circles I facilitate, there is that holding of, you know, for women to be able to express the things that they need to. And I can, having also, I don't know if you've ever been to the camps and things, they often bring the men and women, they have men and women's lodges or whatever, Star Lodge, different, and then come together and share. And they've been some of the most profound healing experiences for me, to hear from the others, whoever they are. You know, it's kind of, yeah, I think I remember years and years and years ago sitting in a men and women sharing and hearing this elder. He was a real elder of the community, and he's like, I don't know what to do. I don't even know if I can open a door for someone, whether that's okay, because it's like we've got to this point where everything's so PC. It's like, am I going to be thanked for opening a door for another person, or will I be, I can do it myself, and it's, oh, there's just so many layers. And I think it was witnessing that, almost that confusion, that everyone's a bit lost and everyone's a bit like, what are we doing, what is okay, how are we relating to one another.
Yeah.
And to hear you kind of talking about that, bringing that sacred rage into that space, just feels like actually it would be really healing, really healing. I mean, it's reminded me of last year I went to see the film, what was it called, Smokehouse Sauna or Sisterhood or something like that. It was about a group of women who, I think it was somewhere like Norway, where they have a smokehouse where they're smoking all the meat, but the other half of the smokehouse is a sauna. And these women were being filmed in this sauna, and there was a woman with no breast who'd obviously been through breast cancer. There was a woman who'd been raped. There was all the stories that women share in a women's circle, kind of on the big screen. It felt so vulnerable actually watching that to a completely mixed audience. And I was, I kind of went home just thinking, how was that for the other people, to like, if you've gone there with your partner or whatever, for them to really hear these kind of taboo subjects that women share when they're with each other, but often don't share in a mixed um, environment like that. It was quite powerful, and I think that's the places where, I mean, obviously, I'm sure women bring, or people of all kinds bring those kind of stories to you with your trauma work.
Yeah.
It's like, that the power of being witnessed, isn't it, and kind of for people to really hear.
Yeah.
um, and also, I went away, especially the woman that spoke of being raped as a teenager. And
Mm.
I kind of, you hear those stories and you just want to lock your children up. Don't you? It's kind of like, I don't want that to happen to my children. But also we can't, we have to set them free and they have to go out into the world. But how powerful that was to kind of for men to hear, a woman speak to that, and to something that I've had to say to my eldest son when he talks about, his issues with masculinity and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, you have no clue what it's like as a woman, really, to have that, the power that men have over us because they're stronger. Basically, that's what it comes down to. Um, and so in some way bringing that back to like spiritual teachers, it's kind
Mm.
of like there is part of almost like a giving our power away in some respects, to those men who end up in abusive positions.
Mm.
um, and also I think often happens in these groups where women have made themselves very vulnerable, people have made themselves very vulnerable, and that's almost where it's easier to manipulate someone when you know their vulnerability, which is where the abuse comes in.
Mm.
So I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many aspects to what you shared, Rachel, but one thing that's coming up for me is to recognize that, some of these things that men are unaware of or have been unaware of are also really subtle.
Mm,
It might not be like the extreme cases of like rape and things like that, but also just a very common microaggression of daily being treated very differently by men that women are just extremely used to. And that in and of itself is a really useful, I suppose, just upgrade, that's possible for people of all genders really to witness each other in what what our daily experience of life is.
mm,
I mean, I heard a statistic the other day that really shocked me and also didn't, and it's from America, but that 1 in 4 women have been sexually abused in America. might not surprise you. But I really felt like that. I wanted to scream that from like from every single rooftop and to every single man. You know, it's like this is the reality. And I feel like the other thing I wanted to say, you know, in terms of like the enabling of the kind of male-bodied leader within this systemic kind of patriarchy we live in, because it's not, you know, as simple, I don't think, as giving your power away, because I feel like that is something that we are encouraged to do or have been for like decades, you know, since I was born. Like, you know, we've been kind of fed this mythology of what it is like to be a woman and how to get a man, and you have to be this like nice, pretty, giggly, like sexy but not too sexy, you know, version of a woman. You've got, it's like fucking so confusing. Sorry, I don't know if we can swear. Is that okay?
I'm fine with swearing.
And I'm laughing, but it's excruciating to and impossible. And so then to have that now, like where we're in this moment of change, and in the moment of change, you know, collapses, you know, a system that has enabled these men. And so there's been this like calling out of, it's like, oh wow, see how they topple, which one's going to be next? Oh, not surprising, it's Russell Brand. Oh, not surprising, it's Yogi Bhajan. You know, it's like, oh, it's like this other yoga teacher from, you know, and every time it happens I'm like, okay, like not surprising, another, you know, charismatic male leader is massively abuse their power, because we're in this, you know, the system we live in has enabled that, but also encourages us to behave in a particular way in order to be of value. So I'm at this point where we're like, well, what a relief. But we're wired in that way, so we're still kind of almost like internally battling, you know. I see it in myself, like I've got makeup on, you know, because I'm aware that I'm on a screen, and you know, so there's part of me that wants to present in a particular way and all of those things. It's, you know, not going to give myself a hard time about it.
No, I mean, I think you know, I'm going through this with my 14-year-old who wants to buy loads of makeup and, you know, kind of cover up her spots and plaster it out. And I was the same. And I'm kind of like, you know, I've just got to this point where I'm just like, live and let live, you know, but also explaining to her, it's not going to help your spots putting all that stuff on your face, you know. But I think I agree. We're in this, it's, we're society is kind of pushing us into these, you know, almost like look like Barbie, but you know, dress slutty but don't be a slut. And you know, there's it's like the Mother Mary, Mary Magdalene kind of like, you know, be holier than thou, you know, virginal, but also there's times when you want to be sexy, and we should be allowed to be sexy and not be, you know, worried that we're going to give off the wrong vibes and things. And going back to that statistic, actually that's lower than I thought, to be honest, because I've sat in circle where I was the only one. Sexual abuse is not my story, you know, addiction, all that stuff is my, and I was like, wow, in a circle of 10 women I was the only one, and I was like, bloody hell, that's like 1 out of 10 not being sexually abused.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well,
I mean
it's
I blows my mind, blows my mind. And I often have this thing of like, why is that the story of for so many people coming in? It's like, why is that chosen as something that's going to wake us up, or on whatever soul level that you can make any sense of this, you know, from child abuse to rape or all that. I mean, we're going totally off the subject of what we were going to talk about, but I, you know, when I, especially when I hear about women who've been, you know, abused as children, I'm kind of like, what soul chooses that, you know, kind of, I'm going to come in and be sexually abused at 4 and I'm going to learn forgiveness or something. It just makes me kind of go, can we not choose different ways to learn whatever lessons we have to learn as humanity. But
I mean, and isn't it amazing when, you know, I heard you say the word addiction. So for your own story, that you can get to the point where you're, I don't know, like how in that you were, but that you were an addict or possibly.
Yeah.
And what that really means, the lived experience, the belief system, all of the things, the drives, this, you know, like, and now where you are.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that in and of itself is a miraculous, incredible story. And it's that it's possible, because when you're in those dark places and when you're in that kind of fucking hell, is this my life? Is this it? Like, that you to have the even the sense of something else is possible is really, you know, can be enough to kind of just take you on the next step, you know. And then you look back and you're like, oh wow, you know, now I'm drinking my goddess tea and like post podcast and, you know, and all of,
Yeah.
and, you know, in a very, very different place. And
Yeah.
so, you know, I
We
don't
all
know.
have our wake up calls.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it is part of, yeah, that kind of hard, really painful journey. You know, I had this moment when I was in a medicine ceremony once where I realized, I was like, oh, I'm in so much fucking pain. I'm so like, I'm never gonna heal. I'm not, you know, I yeah, I don't know if you've been there, but
Yeah.
like I'm so fucked up, I'm so messed up, I'm like, you know, I'm this and that. And then you know, at the end of the night, I was like in beauty, experience the oneness, like no separation. Oh wow, you know, release, all of those things. And I part of me realized that, you know, for some of us, um, that we have to experience, you know, that like the pendulum can swing all the way from that level of pain and distress, and like it can go all the way to the other side. And I realized that, and I thought, wow, that's like, never forget that experience, because it happened. I experienced it in the night.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's those moments that when we are having a wobble or everything's shit, it's like, you know what, remember that this too will pass. It's that old cliche, isn't it? Like, but it's true. It's
Yeah,
true. Yeah. So
totally.
coming back around to kind of you know, one of the things that I think I said to you after I first listened to your podcast about the teachers is kind of like, it almost brings up, well, you know, how do we know who to trust? And for me, I've always been a bit, I always say I'm a bit of a lone wolf. You know, I've never really been part of an institution or kind of, you know, I was brought up going to church and I just thought it was all bullshit. I was literally, it was just, I mean, even for my dad who took me, it was just kind of the thing that we should do to almost, for him, it was like guarantee his spot in heaven. It was literally that. It was kind of like chalking up his little tick the box. I went to church on Sunday. It's all going to be fine. And yeah, I would just sit there just thinking, this is bullshit. This is utter bullshit. And you know, I've done lots of things, like I'm sure you have. You know, I've been to yoga classes, meditation, and you know, I've been to Sufi camps, and I love it all and I absorb it all. And I was recently at a camp this year where, you know, the Sufi teacher was talking about her initiates, and there's part of me that it sparks this kind of like, I want to be an initiate. I want to belong to something. But then I just know there would be so much there that I disagreed with, because ultimately, to me, I have yet to come across anything that doesn't feel patriarchal, doesn't feel like it's, you know, it's like we talked about the women's circle where no one's in charge. You know, we're all creating a cauldron of wisdom, and that's what I love about those kind of things. It's like no one person is saying I've got all the answers, because we're all just putting our wisdom into the pot in the center. But there's still part of me now and again, I kind of go, maybe I'm supposed to have someone to keep me in check, someone to keep me in line. I don't know, but yeah.
Can I ask a question? How do you connect to the sacred? What's your experience?
I just go within. I just go within, and that's always what I come back to, is that actually, I know, I trust my heart. I really trust my own knowing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is that enough?
Yeah. I mean, I think what I'm longing for really is community, is the tribe, which I think we're all longing for. And for me, it's not in church, it's not in a yoga class, it's kind of like, which is why I believe I've always done women's circles. I run red tents and moon lodges, and the women's group that I do, which goes on for a whole year, it's kind of like I'm creating it for myself.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the reason I asked that question is, it's something I come up against, not up against, but it's an inquiry I have. It's one of the reasons I love Gwilym so much, because he's a bit of an anarchist in terms of like sacred dogma. And he's taught me how to let go of my own inner kind of sacred dogma. And I had this really interesting experience where I built a big altar. I do that when I hold dances. And like this one woman spent all her time kind of going up and with all of my stuff, like holding it and waving it around, like my feathers and my sacred items. And it was really interesting to see what it brought up in me.
Yeah,
And I came back, there was quite a lot of anger in me around it, like, how dare she, blah blah blah, doesn't she know how to be around sacred stuff? And all of this sort of like really rigid. It was really rigid. And I spoke to Gwilym about it in this really kind of righteous way, like expecting him to agree. And he was like, who are you to impose any system of sacredness on anybody? And I was like, wow, like, thank you so much for that. Who am I? Like, I could, and so I have a much more gentle approach now. Yeah, someone wants to, I mean, I do invite people. I use like a lot of invitation words in my spaces. This is not, it doesn't land if it doesn't work for you, then do your own thing. This isn't, there's no right or wrong. And I really create that possibility for someone, because I think we do look to the person holding this, we are creating the space, and we do have a duty of care to the people within it. And I think for me, part of that duty of care is to really allow people to not like resonate at all with what we're doing, and that be okay.
Yeah.
And if that is the case, then it's not like they're banished either. That's perfectly valid.
Yeah.
And yeah, that it also takes a huge responsibility away from me. It's almost like a relief. It's like, oh wow, I don't need people to get this. That can't be my agenda, is for someone I'm doing. Like, I need to, and so it feels a lot easier now. I set up, the space, I tune into it, but people can come if they want, people can connect if they want, they don't have to come back. I'm not going to be offended if they don't. Yeah, I might check in with them, but yeah, it doesn't have and I think, going back to what you're saying about this quality of a leader, and like, I think that inner work that's required of us when we hold space, where we have ease and presence within us, where there's not a rigidity of like, it has to be this way. And we see that in so many religions, and so much kind of doctrine and dogma, but it has to be like this and not like this, and you can do this and not that. And
Yeah, you can't come in if you look like this or you're bringing this. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I told you I recently had my this weekend my dance cancelled by the church because I was using tarot cards, you know, and
Mm,
divination. And while I was, you know, again, it was like I was shocked but not shocked. It's like,
yeah.
wow, we're still here, are we? We're still in this like kind of fear-based version of how you connect with something sacred, you know.
I know. I mean, that just reminded me of like 20 years ago. I remember the church not allowing a yoga class.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of like, have we not moved on? Have we not changed? You know?
Well, this church has a lot of different things, yoga, meditation, dance, you know, and
Wow.
yeah, and it's really interesting to see my response because I'm, you know, I've kind of composed an angry letter in my head, you know, and I was like,
Yeah.
I'm, you know, how do I really want to engage with this? You
Yeah.
know, this is my kind of work, and this is what I'm being asked to do is to just be able to step back and you know express that I'm upset because I am,
Mm,
and
yeah.
express that I don't agree and I believe that they've misunderstood what we're doing, but not kind of publicly shame them or anything like that, which is what I wanted to do, is to kind of like let everyone know why and how upset I was, and it's like not fair, but
Yeah.
it's like okay, you know, I it's okay to for them to do that, and I can step back and I'm not going to change the design to meet their expectations of how they want people to engage sacredly in their space, like
Mm,
how I want to, how I roll really. So you know, it's an opportunity for them to have a conversation with me. We can, you know, I'm not going to try and persuade them, but I can just be in good relation with them, and based on what they see they could, I don't think they're going to change. And then I can step away from that space. You know, it's okay. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah. But it does make you just go, God, it's a shame, isn't it? It's a shame.
Yeah. Well, there's a little bit of a like in me about it, like partly because it's a beautiful space.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's where the anger's coming up, is because I'm like, well, how they have this, the best space, it's the cheapest space, it's the space we all use.
Mm,
And so they have a hierarchy, there's a dominance culture there.
yeah.
They
Yeah.
can dictate and say, well, not only do we have the best space, but then we're also in charge of
What can happen here? Yeah.
what can happen in this
Yeah.
space. Just it's like ancestral memory, isn't it? Of like
Yeah.
so many things coming up in response to that, especially being Christianity, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. But I love your response to it. It's like, actually, can we come back to them in a different way without the anger, without the, and maybe that's the healing that needs to happen, and something may change and something may not change, but there's opportunity there. And I think that's the work we're doing, is kind of like, how can we just keep bringing these new opportunities and opening things up, and trusting, it's coming back to that trust that it's changing, and it might just be a bit slower than we want it to be, but it is changing, and it's so different. Like the conversation we were having earlier about our children, and just how different schools are to what they used to be, how different, my parents didn't have a clue about therapy, counseling, it just wasn't in the consciousness, was it? So things are changing, and we can just keep holding and praying in our own way that these spaces become more available. And it was interesting because I was remembering, I think it's the book about the alabaster jar. It's quite an old book where she looks at the tarot, and actually within the tarot cards just came out that it's the hidden story of Mary Magdalene and Jesus. That's what the occult just means hidden, doesn't it? And they put the story into the cards because it wasn't allowed to be spoken about, the possibility that Mary and Jesus maybe were married or maybe had children or whatever. So yeah, it's an interesting book, but it sparked that thought of like, actually, tarot cards are just as sacred as whatever is in churches, the Bible. It's just stories, and archetypes and pictures, like the crucifixion that they have all over the, you know, the 12 stations of the cross. It's like, much rather look at the beautiful pictures in a tarot card than look at those. But
well, it's also you know, the question that it brought up for me, which I wanted to ask them, but I don't really know how at the moment. I'm going to sit with it, but it's like, what is their aim with that room? You know, what do they what are they wanting from that? You know, because if, yeah, you know, what is the Christian aim? Like, I love Christians. I love what it represents. You know, I love the teachings of Jesus, you know, and how I've accessed that weirdly is through plant medicine, because, you know, a lot of the Santo Daime tradition, particularly, is very connected to, you know, Christ energy, and they see the vine as being the reincarnation of Christ. So, you know,
yeah,
and it's real and it's beautiful, and there's imagery and many songs, you know, and so, yeah, I suppose I'm kind of curious about what their aim is and how to kind of have a proper conversation with them around that, and then what they really think about this. You know, what is it about divination and tarot that feels so misaligned with their view of Christianity? You know,
yeah, yeah. So while I was in the States, I went into an indigenous church, and it had an image of the resurrection. So whereas, you know, Christian churches have the crucifixion, they had this massive, beautiful painting of the resurrection. And I was just like, so different, isn't it? Such a different energy.
well, I went into a church, a Catholic church in this little village called Huautla de Jimenez in Oaxaca, Mexico, where the sacred mushroom tradition began, and they have big paintings of mushrooms painted on the outside of their churches
Yeah,
in that village,
yeah,
because that work, you know, when I went and sat with the healers there, we had a big altar covered in pictures of Mary and Jesus, and all of the songs they sung were to them.
yeah,
We took the medicine.
yeah.
So, you know, it was really interesting to see how people access that. You know, that's what, you know, the question about how do you access the sacred, you know, what does it, it's so different for everybody.
Yeah, yeah. And I love that. I mean, I saw that when I was in New Mexico as well. It's like this blending of, like, obviously they had this, you know, whole, yeah, all the missionaries and the Christianity and Catholicism and everything come, and they've kind of blended it with their own beliefs and their own indigenous kind of ways of being. You know, I see these pictures of them in their full regalia with the feathers and everything, and yet they're carrying a massive statue of Mary, and it's just like, wow. And I think I remember saying to you quite a long time ago that I bought a book of Celtic prayers, and I was expecting it to be like, you know, non-Christian prayers, but it was all how these, you know, it was mostly Scottish,
Yeah.
but they'd woven their own nature-based prayers in with Mother Mary and Jesus to kind of almost fit in, wasn't it? To kind of, so they could keep their head down and not be part of this, you know, you're not one of us, you're not part of the church, whatever, because they were still doing it. And I think that's probably what I've done and what you've done as well. It's kind of like we find what really resonates for us.
Absolutely.
And I remember years ago, my mum kind of saying to me, you know, you can't just pick and choose the bits you like. And I just went, why not?
Yeah.
Why not? It was almost in me, you know, as a teenager, really. You know, yeah, I'll go and do yoga, and I'll read books about Egyptian mythology, and I'll pray to Isis. Just what
Yeah.
works.
Well, and I think, you know, what happens because we have this culture that that's developed this kind of broader way of relating to sacredness, you know, particularly where we are, we can like go and chant one night and then go and do yoga another night and go and sit in a plant medicine ceremony another night and then come home and, you know, like listen to Jimi Hendrix or whatever,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
we have this like, and what we don't necessarily have access to within that is a lineage.
yeah. That's that. I guess that's what we're coming back to, the kind of the crux of the conversation. Yeah.
And so, and I suppose I'm naming that because I do notice it, and I notice it's important, and I've, been on this long journey, my own connection to sacredness with, going over to Mexico and being in the States, and then, sitting in traditional ceremonies, but that weren't from this land or here,
Mm,
and then the religion that has existed here for a long time has got so much, for me personally, feels like, to answer for, and so much that it isn't answering for, that I can't relate to it at all without without them taking responsibility. It's like there's been such a massive cover up, and so much denial, and so much getting away with absolutely terrible behavior, that I can't relate to it. And
mm,
that feels okay for me to say that.
yeah.
And so, but I do realize that there's something sometimes missing in my kind of broad way of being with sacredness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and also, and so I suppose there's a couple of things that come from that, which is like a real yearning to reforge something from these lands, which I think is starting to happen. I'm seeing that, and a reclaiming of something here
Yeah.
from us, but we don't necessarily have the framework and the elders and the thing that exists in the container to make it feel kind of like a lineage yet, possibly. But like you say, you create the community, because that's what
Yeah.
it feels like it works, and people come back, and then it develops, and you've been doing that for years, and so that it's starting to feel like a bit of a lineage.
Yeah.
That's all
Yeah.
that people ever did,
Yeah.
in
Well, even
place.
like that, as simple as, I was over at, Emma and John, and they had a beautiful ancestor evening. And we just sat around the fire singing songs. And it's just, that's
Yeah.
what it stirs, that memory of like, this is what we did.
Yes.
This is what we have always done. Sat around fires, sharing stories, honoring whatever you want to honor in that space, whether it's the elements or the ancestors, or praying for
Yeah.
future generations. And that, I just come back to nature for that lineage. I just come back to nature because that's what's always been there before man came with the religion or the ceremonies or the whatever it is. And it is interesting because, as you were saying that, like, yes, one night you can be doing this and you could do ecstatic dance and plant medicine, da, da, da. And I don't tend to do all that anymore.
Yeah.
um and it arises in me that, that word that's bandied around so much, that cultural appropriation stuff. And I had someone recently who didn't want any cacao because cacao is not of this land, but I know goes to ayahuasca ceremonies. And I was kind of like, oh, come on, you can't have one of the, should we just have some nettle tea? It's
Yeah.
like, let's just come back to this land and what's growing in the garden, and we'll just have some nettle tea, and we'll put all of that to one side.
Yeah.
Because there is part of me that just thinks, when that comes into the space of like, yeah, that what is the lineage of what's our history of this land. I think all of those spaces are helping us remember and helping us come back to ourselves and helping us come back to what is really important. And ultimately it's the simplicity. So we're almost coming full circle with your tarot. It's like just sitting with the fire, having a cup of whatever it is, connecting, being together and being in that, like the teachings of Christ is like caring, kindness, unity, love your neighbor, all of those things. It's like,
Yeah.
let's come back to the real essence of what sacred is. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I
And
mean, I was laughing with a friend yesterday because she was talking about the 1111 portal, and I was kind of like, are all these actually real? These things, like the Lion's Gate, the 1010, and I was like, you know what? Every day could be sacred if you want it to be.
yeah, it's true.
It's kind of, I've started to get a bit cynical with all this stuff, and like it's a bit like a Hallmark holiday, like Mother's Day or something. These made up spiritual holidays, and I'm just like, let's just make every day sacred. Let's just make every connection sacred. Let's be, yeah.
Well, and also there is something, me and Gwyl did a episode about the eternal return, this sacred time that appears in ceremony, and appears when we have like a rhythm outside of something linear. Like, so we related it to going through the kind of sun festivals, like Samhain and Calan Gaeaf and Calan Mai, Beltane and Imolc, and having being able to take a moment with those, kind of how the turning of nature happens. And the different cultures have different versions of that, and that is very much something that we have here. It's like,
Yeah.
this is something that belongs here, has come through here, the words are ours. We can create a lineage around this. There's already a lineage here.
Yeah. And like you say, I mean, nature's showing us. It's nature kind of, going, okay, it's
isn't it?
it's getting dark. It's time to close the curtains and be with your ancestors, be with that energy of, or whatever it is in the spring. And you do also hear people kind of saying, oh, those holidays aren't real and they're made up. And I'm like, but it's nature. We're just following nature. It's like, and someone was inspired to create that, and the fact that they are celebrated worldwide in different ways,
and the meaning comes from within, doesn't it? Like, for someone, a stone is a stone. For another person, that stone is a divination tool,
or an ancestor,
or an ancestor, or this is a stick, or it's a wand. And so there is like the intention and the meaning is real, and it comes from within, and it changes for different people. And I suppose it's like acknowledging the importance of meaning, for humans, and what it gives us, anchors us in. It helps us to, be with something other than the mind. The mind is so can take over in, the most brutal ways, really. And so giving ourselves opportunities, like you say, just having a fire and singing, it's like, wow, simple, and what it gives you as a human, that memory, that experience, and you don't have to think about it.
Yeah. So I think that might be a good place to end on, just that reminder of come back to the simplicity. Come back to the simplicity in whatever way that is for you. And I lit a candle before we started, and often for me that is it. It's kind of like, just sit with the candle, just sit and look at the flame, quieten the mind. So thank you so much, Lucy. It's been a really interesting conversation, and I really love how you hold that inquiry around everything. It's kind of like that invitation. It's always just, it's an opportunity. There's always an opportunity there to kind of grow in some way. I can't think of the word, but growth is coming to me. It's like, that's how we're growing, that's how we're healing, by just holding that inquiry around things and that invitation. So thank you.
Is it all right to say one thing around that? Just I suppose it's that not knowing. Like, when we know, that's where that, there's no curiosity if we know. So if we don't know, there's curiosity, and there's this opportunity or possibility to grow, which is, and that is a practice, So thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you. I've loved talking to you. It's been, I feel like we could probably do this for hours and hours,
Another podcast. Thank you so much. So I'm going to be putting all Lucy's info below this video for anyone who wants to get in touch with her and have a look at her website and see all her beautiful offerings. And if you're up North Wales, around Machynlleth Way, there's beautiful dances and cacao with Lucy, so do check it out. Thank you, Lucy. Thanks.
All right.